a quick warm up. So, I will be describing an antibiotic, and if you think you know the answer, drop it in the chat. I am an antibiotic everyone loves to prescribe, even when I shouldn't. I am broad spectrum, I am popular, and I am often misused. Who am I? Who am I? Let's see if anyone. Most misused antibiotic. Azithromycin, meropenem. Yes, the answer is our most patients who are deficient, that is the meropenem. So let's get started with the business for today. So it's just not any other webinar. It's like ID version of Netflix, except that the content, what you see, will actually save life. So here are a few ground rules. Just quick reminders to keep things going smooth. Please stay muted throughout the session. Drop in your questions anytime in the chat. We will take them up at the end of the session. You can engage actively because most of the time your questions will often add more value to the session rather than just the slides. So for our first talk this evening, we are honored to have with us Dr. Neha Mishra. She is consultant in infectious diseases and head of department of her department at Manipal Hospitals, Bangalore. She is also our faculty at KMC Manipal. So why is CAP the perfect wow topic? Because it's one of the top reasons the antibiotics get prescribed. Any patient, even with a fever, sore throat, cough, gets antibiotic prescribed. So here we are to learn a structured, evidence-based community-acquired pneumonia approach so that we directly prevent unnecessary broad-spectrum use and reduce AMR. So, ma'am, we warmly welcome you. Over to you for your session.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Akshata. Thanks for that warm welcome. I'll re-ask the same question. Is my slide proper, visible? Yeah. Okay. And am I audible or should I be louder? Should I be louder?
I think so. I mean,
okay. I'll try to be as loud as possible.
Yeah.
If you think you am not audible at any point, please let me know. I'll do whatever I can at that point. So, namaste. I'm Dr. Neha Mishra. I work as consultant infectious diseases at Manipal Hospital, Bangalore. Today, I'm told to tell approach to community-acquired pneumonia, and at each step, we'll see if we can come down or we can de-escalate or we can stop antibiotics, as this is pertaining to antimicrobial resistance and prevention of antimicrobial resistance. So, but for doing all that, we should know where to use and what to use, how to, curate a treatment plan for yourself or for your patient, so that there is no misuse in that aspect. So moving on, I'll try to keep it patient based, but because I need to cover a lot of things, but we'll start with the patient and then I'll carry on to go on through each of these topics one by one.
Is her voice low, Akshata, for you? Because for me it sounds low.
Yes, ma'am. Can you be a little louder?
Yeah.
Or maybe keep it closer.
I'll just keep close and I'll be. Am I audible? No. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll probably shout, which is okay with me. I'll start with the patient, which is right now admitted with us in our wards. As Akshata rightly pointed out, that pneumonia is one of the commonest way our patients present to us, and these febrile patients, breathless patients, we have to curate a plan so that we can avoid overusage or misuses of antibiotics as far as possible. So there is this lady who presented with us, who is 70-year-old female, presented to emergency room with fever for past 2 days. She had cough, which was dry, and she said that it was more when she was lying down. She had breathing difficulty, and her family told her that she has been talking.
It is not my work even.
Hello.
Continue.
Request to, yeah, please. Yeah. Okay. So she had breathing difficulty for past 1 day, and we were told by her family that she has been sleeping a lot for past night. She was not a person who visited hospital very often, not known to have any comorbid conditions so far. Her family members told us that she traveled to Chennai 4 weeks back. There she caught some respiratory infection, and her relatives also got it. She was treated with the local some local medications. She got some medications locally, and she got better with that. But there were no records available for the same. In the hindsight, family members also gave history of her having a loud snoring habit, and she also used to get up at night because she used to feel breathless at times. When we examined her, she was obese. She was propped up. She was mildly distressed. She was drowsy, but she was arousable. She was talking, but she was sleeping in between. Uh, she was febrile with 101.3 of her temperature. Heart rate was 110. She was tachypneic. BP was maintained. She had saturation, which was 88 at room air. She maintained with 2 liters of nasal prong. She came up above 93, 94. She was not cyanosed, no clubbing, no pallor, no other pedal edema. When we examined her respiratory system, the bronchial breath sounds were heard over left lower zone, and there were inspiratory crackles all over the chest. So she was mildly somnolent, but there were no focal neurological deficit that we could assess. And cardiovascular system wise, she was tachycardic, but the heart sounds were all normal. When we examined her hands, this is how her hands looked. So there were reddish, blotchy erythematous rashes over the palms, and they were beginning to start at the soles as well. She said that they pain at certain points, but that is all about it. So this is how her hands looked. There were no other rash, no eschar, no other general physical findings which were important. So my question to you is, maybe you can answer in the chat box, what would you do in first 5 minutes of her arrival at emergency? So she's sick, no, we have to act fast. So how will you stepwise approach this patient so as no step is missed and nothing, we do everything properly as possible? Okay. I don't think anybody's answering, so I'll carry on. No problem. Well, so what I did, I'll tell you, and we'll see how right it is. So we did an X-ray. One ABG was done because it is available at our center. It is not a mandate. Then we have to decide whether we have to admit her or we can manage her in OPD. In such patient, we also have to decide whether if we have to admit her, where we should admit her. She should be a ward patient or she needs to go to ICU. And then, of course, we have to plan on treatment and medication. So this is how her X-ray looked. You can see there are some non-homogeneous opacities present in the left lower zone, and she also had these non-homogeneous, this increased bronchovascular marking both sides, but predominantly we can see here there was non-homogeneous opacity. So coming to the theory part of it, when these patients come, how do we diagnose CAP in these adults? So what our American guidelines actually say that diagnosis of CAP in adults without any immunocompromising condition, we should look at any newly recognized pulmonary infiltrate on chest imaging. It could be either your ultrasound, it can be your X-rays, it can be CT, depending upon availability. And of course, we'll discuss which one plays more important a role and what are pros and cons of choosing one over the other. And then they should have one of these respiratory symptoms like, cough, increased sputum, dyspnea, or pleuritic chest pain, or they should have at least one of these abnormal findings like lung sounds which were palpable, fever which is more than 100.4, leukocytosis or unexplained bandemia, or if they're hypoxic. See, if the patient is hypoxic, that becomes directly an indication to admit. So, but with this, we have to decide whether your patient has CAP or not. So now, if you look at our patient, she definitely has a infiltrate, she has cough, sputum, and then she also has abnormal lung findings. She's febrile. Well, we'll do the test later to find out whether other things are there or not, but definitely as per this particular criteria, she definitely needs to get admitted. Now, once she definitely has a pneumonia. With this, we know that we have diagnosed a pneumonia. Now we have to decide whether we should admit her or not. So any patient with community-acquired pneumonia in elderly without any immunocompromised condition, if they have hypoxia, they are directly eligible for admission. But if they do not have hypoxia, say our patient had saturation of 95% when they came, so then these scoring systems are available by name of PSI and Curve 65, which we'll discuss, which can help us in making this decision whether we should treat the patient as inpatient or we can manage them outpatient. So Curve 65 score is probably one of the easiest score to use. You can use it for, C stands for confusion, urea, respiratory rate, blood pressure, age, and 1 point each has been provided to each of them. Depending upon the score that you get, you can divide it into 0 to 1, 2, and 3. And 3 and more is associated with more mortality, and they should definitely be managed in hospital as severe pneumonia. We have to assess them for ICU requirement. And Group 2, probably there is intermediate mortality. They need short admission, but they also are better monitored in the hospital, while below that can be actually sent to the home. So this problem with this, what are they? We will discuss again. Now this is your PSI. It is a very comprehensive yet and complicated score. It has almost 20 points, and there are not uniform points to each thing, but it involves a lot of comorbidities, so it is well sorted for an immunocompromised individual. And this is a very well validated tool, an old tool which is developed by pneumonia patient outcome research team, and it helps in estimating the hospitalization need and also the mortality judgment at 30 days. So now what are the pros and cons and which one we should choose over the other? See, the best thing or the best benefit of doing Curve is actually it is very simple. It is quick. You can do it. You don't need a lot of labs. You can use it as a triage tool, and it is good at identifying high risk patients. While the problem is that it is not very when you say it is not very comprehensive in identifying safe OP candidates. It do not incorporate any comorbid condition, and sometimes it is not easy to do a urea in certain places. Again, most of the people working at corporate level, it may not be that difficult, but it is not available at a smaller centers. PSI, it is well validated, it's old, it's a very sensitive tool to identify low risk patients which are suitable for home treatment. So low risk, when you are seeing, you can, and you are applying PSI, you can be safe in telling a patient, okay, you can go home. And it definitely incorporates comorbidities, so it has more value in assessment of low risk patients. Now, the problem with it is very complex. You have 20 variables, each has different point. It is impossible to remember entire PSI. Thank God they have, now those scoring systems incorporated in those up-to-date or several medical apps which are available. So you can do it online, but it is a complex thing to remember. When we didn't have these things, these are very difficult scores to remember. But with the complexity, the benefit is that it can actually have predict the low risk mortality accurately in lowest classes. But it also outweighs the age very heavily. So there is 1 point each for each year of age. So it can actually upclassify the elderly. That's the problem. And it may not be very ideal to do it in a resource limited setting, because if you see, it involves BUN, arterial pH, you definitely need a glucose, sodium, hematocrit, etc. So a lot of things are required when you want to come to a conclusion as far as this particular score is concerned. So whether statistically one is better over the other. So this study showed that both have similar outcomes. Curve actually is quicker, so helps in identifying mortality risk in severe CAP better. While PSI is good to tell the patient, okay, you go home. But they have similar sensitivity, and we can choose for overall mortality prediction, and you can choose depending upon availability of these tests and the circumstances that you work in. So now we have decided that this patient has pneumonia. We have come to a conclusion that this patient definitely requires admission. Now we have to assess whether he has severe CAP or not. She has severe CAP or not, sorry. So there is this criteria again given to us by IDSA and ATS Society. It was picked up from 2019 guidelines. So see, there is a major criteria. Either your patient should have one of these, that is septic shock with need for vasopressor and respiratory failure requiring ventilation, or minor criteria wherein you have respiratory rate, PA2, multilobar infiltrates. So our patient, when initially she came, she did not fit into this, although she worsened over a period of 12 hours itself. And then we ended up doing a CT, which showed multilobar involvement. There was a PA2 FI2 ratio which worsened. She became more confused, uremic. and her respiratory rate also worsened, and she ended up in ICU. So our patient had leukocytosis to begin with polymorph predominance. Her CRP jumped within 1 day. It jumped from 69 to 226. Her procal was this much. We did a flu panel later, mycoplasma, which was negative, and her acute febrile workup was also negative. Tropical fevers were negative. She had urine RBCs, but no pus cells. Urea was 28.3 when we shifted her to ICU. Later, her blood culture came sterile. When we did a CT, I'll show her CT little later, but she had multilobar involvement. There were consolidations which were seen everywhere, and there were downglassing as well. So we ended up doing a BAL after intubating her, and all the workup from even BAL came negative. So the cell cytology, even including cytology that we did, was negative. Later on, yesterday, she ended up developing a stroke as well. So now she's also being evaluated for causes other than infective causes of pneumonia. So it is very important to keep working up this patient so that we can figure out what is causing these things in them. Well, we'll come to that later. So coming to epidemiology and risk factors of pneumonia, this is a US based data. I'll show you Indian data, but understand that Streptococcus pneumoniae remains the commonest cause worldwide so far. One reason, but these things differ from place to place, differ from what are the comorbidities or what are the antibiotic prescription patterns of the particular area. But still, if you look at the worldwide population, strep pneumo remains one of the commonest cause. Haemophilus influenza, staph aureus, then enterobacteriaceae, followed by ureatypicals. That all that follows later. See, this chart here actually shows how simple thing like vaccination can change which bacteria may be predominant in which area. This red dots indicate European countries, while blue dot indicates US based countries. And you can see that the pneumococcal risk of development of pneumococcal pneumonia has actually come down as more than 2/3 of people, eligible adults in USA are vaccinated, while it is higher in Europe because 20 to 30% of Europeans are only vaccinated for pneumococcal pneumonia. Therefore, it is important to understand that simple things can make the prevalence of each organism different in different region. So it is very important to be aware of which bacteria or which kind of pathogen is most common or most prevalent in the area of your practice. Now, this is a meta-analysis which was published in 2024 in Curious Journal, which also kind of goes in the same lines. So strep pneumo being the commonest one, Klebsiella being the second common one, staph followed by staph, and then others. And this showed that diagnostic yield definitely varied from center to center. Why? Because it varied on where we are doing BAL. It was different in places where we had multiplex PCRs. So, or the technology advancement, wherever there were more technologies available or there were more number of tests which were done, those places had higher yield in terms of diagnosis of pneumonia cause. While you should, and why is this important, or why this may be even of any relevance to figure out whether there is which organism is prevailing, because these resistance rate to Klebsiella pneumonia, strep pneumonia can be different in different areas. You will in this particular study, there was only across the organism, amoxicillin was susceptible only for 50% of times. So that means it is difficult to predict. If we don't know that information, it may be very difficult to predict which antibiotic may be the best suited antibiotic for your patient. Now, okay. This particular study also stated that even in Indian setup, scoring like KERP 65 scoring is effective in predicting the outcomes. And yeah. So this was a study done by same set of people. So this study was published in June 2024, and the one which I showed earlier was published in July 2024. So you look at, this was done locally by the authors, and the previous one was actually a meta-analysis. They looked into what are the common cause in their setup. So you see, for them Klebsiella was one of the most common cause, which was not similar to what they saw across India. So that is why it may be different in different regions, and it may be important for us to figure out which bacteria or which pathogen is commoner in your region. Similarly, we should also see, we have to decide, after we decided that patient is definitely having CAP, then we decided that this patient definitely needs admission. Then we have to take a call that this patient, whether this patient has severe CAP or not. After that, we have to make a call on what antibiotics to give them or how do we treat them. So risk factors for methicillin resistant, we have to figure out if they are carrying risk factor for MRSA or Pseudomonas, yes or no. So looking for those risk factor may help us in curating their treatment plan better. So risk factor for MRSA, you all must be aware of. If there is any healthcare exposure, if surgeries, long-term facility, hospitalizations, dialysis, or any specific risk factor for known MRSA colonization, like past infection for MRSA, or recent close contact with the person colonized, HIV infection, IVD use, homelessness, etc. And environmental exposure, like people who live in crowded setting, military services, prisons, etc., or sharing of sharps and needles can be putting a patient at higher risk of MRSA. Similarly, we also have to remember whether the patient has Pseudomonas, because your general beta-lactams, which you use as a treatment for CAP, may not work for your Pseudomonas, and you have to give an anti-pseudomonal agent in these cases. So what puts a person at highest risk? If tracheostomy, bronchiostasis, and severe COPD, that indicates here LD is at 3, and is present, or if the prior Pseudomonas infection or colonization is present. If these three are present in any patient, whether it is hospitalized or is on ventilatory support, then that will actually increase the risk of them having Pseudomonal infection, and they should definitely get a cover for anti-Pseudomonal with an anti-Pseudomonal beta-lactam. So you should always keep that in mind. Now, these Pseudomonas can remain the Pseudomonas type of Pseudomonas they are, or there is always a chance of DTR Pseudomonas. Therefore, that also should be assessed. So COPD increases the risk of drug-resistant Pseudomonas multifolds, previous hospitalization, previous ICU cares, antibiotic receipt, nosocomial infection, any hospital stay or invasive medical procedures can increase. So if your patient is not responding and you know that they are on Pseudomonas, you should always keep that in mind and try to make the diagnosis faster. So there are other organisms which are atypical, and we should keep them in mind. So things like, I cannot cover all the organisms, but I'll cover few. So for example, Legionella, it resides predominantly in the water systems. It is actually intracellular fastidious organism, which is transmitted by aerosol, doesn't grow on regular cultures. It is inhaled from the aerosol, enters the alveoli, multiplies in the macrophage. The macrophage, once, after invasion to macrophage, it blocks the phagosome lysosome fusion, where if they actually fuse together, the bacteria will die. But since it is blocked, they start multiplying within the cell system, cause intense inflammation, necrosis, and that can lead to fever, hyponatremia, diarrhea, and other extrapulmonary symptoms associated with it. This particular bacteria needs optimal growth temperature. So they grow well between 27 to 42. Their growth is very largely stunted if the temperature is above 50 or at very cooler temperature. pH preference is also 6.8 to 8, and they do not do well with high or low pH. If the water is chlorinated, then that reduces the Legionella count, while if it is carbonated, that increases the Legionella count. The reason to show this picture is that they can have extrapulmonary symptoms also, and if there are electrolyte disturbances, rhabdomyolysis, and other features of severe Legionella, Legionnaire's disease, that can actually mount to increased mortality and increased ICU admission. Coming to Mycoplasma, don't get scared by the entire thing. What I want you to remember is Mycoplasma is the smallest bacteria, and it is cell wall deficient. That's why cell wall acting antibiotics do not work on them. They adhere to the cilia, ciliated respiratory epithelium. They actually stunts the cilia, causes ciliostasis, and nuclear fragmentation, inflammation, and airway damage, which leads to a lot of cytokine storm. Why we also should remember this? Because it actually does a good amount of molecular mimicry, and then that can cause a lot of extrapulmonary symptoms, which we should remember. And that is why there is a strong evidence that links the mycoplasma pneumonia to chronic refractory acute asthma, because PCRs have detected card toxin positivity. Card toxin is something like pertussis toxin, which also binds to surfactant protein A and enters via endocytosis and prevents causes cholestasis. This particular bacteria is most common in school-going children, and it spreads through respiratory droplets. People who live in closed setting or who are in the schools, military groups, hospitals, etc., there it is known to cause more trouble. This is how it looks. This is the area which gets attached to the ciliated epithelium. That area, the P1 adhesin complex is the main complex. The rest of them are HMV2 or HMV1, 2, 3 that also help in adhesion. So eventually when it adheres to the ciliated epithelium, that's how it causes entire necrosis and other features. Okay, with that I move on to laboratory evaluation. Sorry. So what is important when we kind of figure out what are the tests, apart from doing your liver function, kidney function, ABGs, or your regular CBCs, what is more important after we have figured out a pathway? So now we have a patient, we know he has pneumonia. We have assessed them for inpatient or outpatient. We have looked at the severity, we have looked at the imaging, and in the previous slide, we have looked at the risk factors. So our patient did not have any major risk factor apart from age. So she probably did not have any underlying disease that was previously evaluated or never had any problem apart from the historical appearance of OSA, obstructive sleep apnea. Rest of the things seemed all right. So we don't know as yet. We are still in process. So now we have to decide after this much of evaluation what more to do. So we have to decide when to send what. In non-severe CAP, we need not send your regular blood cultures as per the guidelines. We have to send it in severe CAP. We have to do procalcitonin definitely in severe CAP if it is available. Respiratory culture only for patients where we are thinking of MRSA or Pseudomonas as a causative organism. That's where we should definitely think of it. Or people who have advanced lung structural disease or previous hospitalization, etc. Molecular testing, again, severe pneumonia, it is, if available, it is recommended. Nasal swab, again, if you are starting the cover for MRSA or you have history of previous hospitalization, then you should definitely, a previously colonized patient in a severe or non-severe CAP, then you have to definitely consider MRSA nasal swab as per guidelines. I'm not sure if it is very widely practiced in India, but yes, definitely it is a guideline recommendation as per this particular set. Now again, as far as viral PCR is concerned, you have to do it depending upon community travel risk, potential exposures, seasonal variation. All these things have to be kept in mind, and then we have to send for these particular testing. And urine test for Legionella and pneumococcus should be definitely sent in severe CAP, while you can, in non-severe, you can choose to do it only if there is any epidemiological factor that is indicating to them. Now, after deciding on what test, we will take these one by one. We always keep getting confused between X-ray versus computed tomography or ultrasound. Now, ultrasound is one of the very good tools which is available, but look at the sensitivity of this particular, X-rays are very good tool which are available, but they're very less sensitive, although they are very specific. So if some problem is there, then they definitely have a problem, but it may miss it out in certain cases. But it is widely available, it is cost effective, clinician, all of us are fairly trained for interpreting an X-ray, and it can be used as a useful tool in exclusion in a high volume places. And as I said, it can have lower sensitivity in early disease, or even, there can be interpretation variability. Lung ultrasound, it's a very good tool now being used by ICU setups a lot. It has the advantage of you can do it bedside, detect the pleural effusion, consolidation, and it has no radiation. But the only limitation is it is operator dependent. So as you learn, you will learn more and more and more of it. But it's something that may vary from person to person. So what B lines I can see, some people might not see, or what they can see, I may not be able to see. So it comes with practice. So it is very much operator dependent. Slowly, when you keep doing more, I think people learn better. But it is very good tool if somebody is well trained in it. Computed tomography, it is one of the best thing when you are in confusion, when we have complicated a case, like in our patient, we can actually do a detailed visualization of lung parenchyma, distinguish the mimics. But the only problem is it is high in cost and has radiation exposure. Not every center may be blessed with the availability of a CT scan, and you may have a overinterpretation, or sometimes we may end up over investigating these patients, but it is always the diagnostic test of choice as far as picking up pneumonia is concerned. This is our patient CT. This was the X-ray that you saw. See, in this patient, you can see that it was actually not only this particular area involved. She had involvement of upper zone going way below the lower zone. There was also a pleural effusion. So okay, we can choose. We now understand that CT is a better modality, but does it make any difference in the end outcome of these patients? So while CT does show, this is a RCT. It was a multicentric non-inferiority RCT done in about 2,400 patients, and they tried to see whether it makes a large difference by short form physical component summary score, which looked into the functional health at 4 weeks. So these patients, when they did the final analysis, it was found that while ultra low CT scan is superior in imaging and it gives a better detail, picks up more pneumonias at emergency department, it does not improve the short-term functional outcomes or even reduce the hospital stay when compared to CT scan. So you may choose whichever modality you're choosing in the beginning, the end result remains same. And this was published in 2023. Coming to multiplex PCRs, now there is a lot of hangama about multiplex PCR availability. All of us are, confused whether to use it, where to use it, whether not to use it, what to do about the entire situation. So see, there will be a lot of variability depending upon these multiplex PCRs availability. There are a lot of platforms available now where you can do these. So if you are doing it in a non-invasive sample, it was found that in this RCT, it was found that routine multiplex PCR in non-ICU hospitalized CAP without any immunosuppression did not reduce the clinical endpoints and length of hospital stay or ICU admission rates. And there was no significant difference even between the antibiotic related adverse effect or 30-day mortality. And so it did not even reduce the antibiotic usage as well. So they didn't help in any way. This was published in 2024. This was a study published in JAMA. They looked into whether the provision of appropriate pathogen-directed treatment based on these microbiological tests and time to provision of pathogen-directed treatment, that is up to 48 hours of post-randomization, helped these patients in better outcomes. So actually, the intervention group did have superior outcomes, and they found that the microbiological pathogen directed treatment was started earlier in these patients and when compared to the standard of care. So again, coming to procalcitonin, most of the trials, this was a trial done in 2018, and this tried to look into whether procalcitonin guided antibiotic use in LRTI helped. So this trial suggested that PCT guided therapy is safe, but its routine use did not significantly reduce the antibiotic exposure in broad population. It did bring down the attributable antibiotic associated side effect, and it led to fewer antibiotic prescriptions, but there was no significant reduction in the overall antibiotic exposure. And the hard outcomes like mortality at the rate 90 day was also not different. So then they combined the procalcitonin and mixed it with multiplex PCR and saw they created a multi-cap study. It was published very recently in 2025 itself. They did the multi-cap study and looked into whether combining this into the protocol, multiplex PCR plus procalcitonin, did reduce any antibiotic exposure in critically ill patient in CAP. So what they did was they did it across 20 centers. They had approximately 406 patients. Out of that, 385 were evaluated. And now they tried to test, as I said, MPCR plus PCT versus conventional methods, and the median number of days alive without antibiotic at day 28 was also same, and at in both control and intervention group. So in ICU patient with CAP, management studies combined with both strategies combined also failed to reduce the antibiotic exposure or to improve the outcome of 28 at 28. uh, Lower respiratory tract samples should be sent for multiplex PCR whenever non-standard severe CAP antibiotics are being prescribed or even being considered. They also suggested that procalcitonin to reduce the duration of antibiotic treatment in severe CAP in conjunction with the clinical scenario may help in reduction of antibiotic usage or overusage. While American guidelines say that it can definitely be used in severe CAP if available, that is about PCR. While PCT also, we can consider the availability both in severe and non-severe CAP patients only as an adjunct. And remember, when we say procalcitonin, the serial values help. And how many times in Indian setup we are able to do serial values? So from that aspect, it may be difficult for us to give a place to this particular test. Although with increasing availability, further reduction in cost, it may become more used, and then we may have more of our data, which can help us in creation of or curatage of our own guidelines. All right. So our patient initially was started with beta-lactam and atypical cover, oxygen supplementation, supportive care, mechanically ventilated due to poor respiratory efforts. The evaluation is still being done. We are now suspecting an autoimmune pathology. Most of the workup for infective etiologies have come back negative. Now, so you have assessed that patient has pneumonia. You have looked at the inpatient, outpatient. You have looked into the severity. You have looked at the risk factors. You have also looked at the investigations. Now we are deciding what treatment. All this thing has to happen simultaneously. But when we are talking about it, we are talking in sections. So treatment coverage from depending upon local antibiogram should be considered. Now, lot of hangama whenever there is we talk about and your caps. We always talk about whether these people need your steroids or not. So when one study came in 2023 May, I remember there was a huge hue and cry that because it had a positive outcome, they said that if we added hydrocortisone 200 mg in a patient within 24 hours of diagnosis of severe CAP, it showed benefit of on 28 days all-cause mortality, and the result was 6.2 versus 11.9. So this was double-blinded RCT, and giving the treatment well within 24 hours in a 24 hours of putting a label of severe CAP in these individuals, giving treatment to these patients is very how do you say, very difficult. So it may not be practically possible in a high volume setups like ours. So that one study came positive, but after that in September 2023 there was another double blinded randomized RCT which was published, and they used methylprednisolone. They looked at 60-day all-cause mortality. It did not show any benefit. Remap cap also, that is published now. It was this study was actually done during COVID times, and this was a non-COVID arm of that particular RCT. They tried to look into what happens to them when they gave methylprednisolone to them, and it showed no mortality benefit at day 90 also. Sorry. Whenever you are required, when the patient is hypoxic and has respiratory failure, needing, you think that you can wait out on the intubation, your high flow oxygen therapy may be helpful because it helps in humidifying and the humidified high fraction, delivering humidified and high fraction of oxygen to the patient, and has mild positive and expiratory pressure as well. It gives great comfort to the patient, because in NIV patient may be very claustrophobic. It reduces the heart respiratory rate, and also if we are doing it in right kind of patient, it also reduce the intubation rates in such patients. We can see, when we compare, so from oxygen supplementation, HFNO is always better, and NIV can be used as an option if the patient is persistently hypoxic and doesn't need any immediate intubation. So these patients, so now we have decided how to treat these patients. So the reason I picked up that case was there were so many things which helped us in moving through the chart, moving through the proper diagram. Our patient is still being diagnosed, and in that patient we are actually thinking of non-infectious causes now. As I said, most of the workup for infectious causes have been negative. These patients need daily assessment. We need to look at them, look at their clinical progression, keep looking at causes of CAP on a daily basis versus other etiologies like we did, and assess for clinical stability using standard criteria. And whenever possible, we should try to de-escalate the antibiotics. What do we mean, or what do I infer when I say clinical stability? There is proper criteria. When do you discharge them? We discharge, and when there is a clinical stability at least for 24 hours, we have to ensure post-discharge follow-up, and consider the vaccination. You have to consider pneumococcal influenza, COVID, depending upon epidemiology and local prevalence. Smoking cessation and counseling. You should tell them about respiratory etiquette, hand hygiene, etc. Take this time as an opportunity to train them for these. Optimize the management of chronic condition, nutritional support, and physical rehabilitation. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. Yeah. So see, diagnosis. This is the chart we should follow. When we see, we have to initially assess the patient, look at their clinical condition, listen to their history, do the proper examination. Then we should decide whether admit or not. That can be done with the help of the scores I showed. When we decide to admit, we have to decide whether we need to image or not. Now imaging can be chosen depending upon availability, because eventually what we saw in the RCTs, it may not lead to too much different outcomes. But whenever there's a complicated patient, we should definitely choose a CT scan, because that gives us more information and helps us in distinguishing from the other etiologies better. Now, after doing that, all this should keep happening one by one, tuck, 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 so that it's not delayed. Then you have to look at the severity of the CAP, as I have told in the previous slides, and that will help you in decision making of where to admit. After that, you have to investigate and assess for risk factors, then treat depending upon those, reassess and discharge, follow up and vaccinate. So this is what I would want you to remember. If you follow this flow, most of the time we can. And this is my team. I would thank you for your patience. I hope I am almost on time. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your clear and crisp, practically based approach towards community acquired pneumonia. Ma'am, there are two questions. One of the question is, after how many days of illness mycoplasma IgM should be done?
Yeah. So you see, doing serologies way early in the disease may not help. So since PCR at our place is not available, that was sent. But doing a PCR in the early disease is more beneficial than doing a IgM. You should wait for at least a week's time before you do so.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And they're asking any Indian data on Procal in HLH or
There
MAS?
are Procal in HLH or MAS. Okay, that's like I may. Inflammatory state that is on. I don't think it is very useful to do a procalcitonin, but I'll look it up and I'll get back to you on that.
Yes. Ma'am, what is your comment on use of nebulization tobramycin in patients with COPD with Pseudomonas aeruginosa?
There is some weak data about all these nebulized vaccines, but none of the guidelines recommend them. And they can have some role in community acquired pneumonia, but again, these things are still to be studied in more detail. We put details. No, amoxicillin not working in 50% of cases of pneumonias here.
Yes. Rest of the questions were more into your case which you had discussed. So
Case is still under evaluation, since I could find most of the things that I wanted to teach, that how to assess the severity and how to assess your these things we have presented. We are suspecting vasculitis in her, actually.
yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your time from your busy schedule.